Hello everyone, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be my Game Week 23 transfer plans. And I did want to talk about, of course, how my team is doing for Game Week 22, what the landscape of my team is looking like for the future, but then also specifically within Game Week 23, the question of whether we go into Haaland or not. However, I think there is obviously a topic to discuss. And a lot of people have been asking me questions about it. I've also gotten, some feedback about it, and I haven't really been able to respond just out of wanting to sort of collect my thoughts, but then also making sure that I don't compromise some of my friends within the community. But these are my thoughts on Walkergate. And just to show, of course, what exactly happened was that I did buy Walker at one point within this game week, as you can see, and I did bench him. So I did bench him before the deadline, and I benched him at 5:59 on the deadline. And ultimately didn't share this information until the end of the deadline because I literally made my move to bench Walker 1 minute before the deadline. And by the time I finished doing that, the deadline was over and I shared my move on Twitter. So I can show you that I did actually transfer in Walker this week within my transfer history. As you can see, I transferred in Walker early. I went for Walker and sold cash very, very early on. This was after the FA Cup game that Man City had played. This was before he made an interview with his son, sort of addressing the cheating allegations, which are not really allegations, of course, it happened. And I also brought in Eze for Salah before the deadline and before that day of the deadline. So what happened on the day of the deadline was I was at work, as you can see. A lot of people were waiting for my stream. I said on Twitter already that this is a week that it's not possible for me. I have real life work demands, and it meant that I was at the office at work. As you guys know, when I do live stream, usually, what ends up happening is I try to look through all my group chats, any sort of forums that I have access to, any sort of insights that I have in terms of FPL, and I will share with you guys any leaks that I actually potentially see, whether it's online, whether it's through group chats, or anything like that. This was an opportunity where I could not do so, but I was in a group chat where I did read at around 5:58 that Walker could have been benched. Now, I wasn't sure about the truth of that. I just knew that there was a possibility that Walker was benched, and I reacted to that myself with my own team, as you can see, by putting Walker on the bench. Now, why was I comfortable putting Walker on the bench? First of all, I think when you look at my team, Gabriel was the one who was going to get benched. I didn't know that Trent was going to get benched versus Chelsea, so I just played Trent. I put a poll on Twitter as well, as to whether I should play Alexander-Arnold or Gabriel. Gabriel was initially sitting on my bench, and I looked at it more as, of course, he had somewhat the worst fixture out of the players. Of course, as it turns out, I guess he's outscored Porro and Trent Alexander-Arnold. But that's what happened. I was comfortable because I had three defenders that were still good. And also, this is the first time I've ever had a leak that the rest of the field didn't have access to. So this was one of the first deadlines where I wasn't looking through Twitter on the deadline, where I wasn't looking at YouTube streams for the deadline. So usually, of course, we've gotten leaks before through YouTube, right? Someone like Andy, for example, in Game Week 1 had a Gabriel starts or Gabriel benched leak, and that has a huge impact on FPL. I wasn't around to see whether information was public or private or not. I just had the chance and I was looking to just make transfers for my team. As it turns out, of course, no one had access to the Walkergate, but a fair few within the FPL community. And I know that sounds awful. Personally, revisiting this situation myself, I know a lot of people are frustrated, and I think the best thing to do, of course, is either to remove myself from group chats where I can get leaks, or to continue to do what I usually do, which is to go on live streams and to react to those leaks when possible and to share that with you. Unfortunately, in this game week, I wasn't able to do so. As I said, just due to the fact that I had work demands. There's no reason why I had to be not live streaming other than the fact that I was at work. That's just the simple reality. It was something that for me is extremely regrettable because I've gotten a lot of sort of negative feedback from it, even some real life threats, which is not the best thing to read recently. And it's been hard to take, especially when I do think I'm a manager who likes to share insights with other people, even if it might be private insights. I don't do so trying to compromise my friends and my other FPL managers who might share information with me, but that's the reality. I sort of have a conflict of interest with the sort of engaged few who actually sort of look out for me giving advice. And I also have some FPL managers who might have access to information sometimes who we don't know whether it's true or not. And I think it's sort of reminiscent, of course, as I said, of the Gabriel's bench situation. The difference, of course, is that I don't personally get leaks. No one actually messaged me on DM and says that I can share leaks. And it's not a case where when I get these leaks, I decide to keep this information for myself. There's been many times this season where I would have preferred to actually have City leaks. For example, if I knew Haaland was injured, I wouldn't have, kept Haaland in my team. I wouldn't have done many things within my FPL team. So this is the first time I've actually had information where I think, of course, there was a sort of difference in terms of the information that I had access to, and that I was able to act upon before the deadline, and my community had access to. So in the future, as I said, my plan is just to live stream and to share this information where possible, without compromising my friends. And that's that. I don't want to say who shared the leak. I don't want to talk about any of that stuff anymore. That's my position. As I said, very regrettable that I wasn't able to share with other people. And I know how people sort of look at me right now. And it's hard to take because I feel I'm not someone who likes to keep an advantage for myself, and do well at FPL because of that. As it turns out, of course, as I said, Gabriel, Porro, and Trent got 1 point or 2 points. So the outcome was not significant, but I know a lot of people now sort of think there's a stain on my FPL career, which I generally don't think there is, but that's that. And that's all I'm going to be talking about in terms of the Walker situation. So let's move on quickly towards my transfer plans. In terms of my transfer plans, as you can see here, I think there are a couple issues with my team. First of all, we need to sort of monitor the Eze injury, but it doesn't seem like it's going to really impact my team for next week, because when you sort of look at my team, I could very well just bench Eze. Yes, of course, I have Darwin, which is, of course, not exactly the player you want versus Arsenal, because Arsenal's Arsenal and they're a good defense, but it would be sort of a toss-up between the two of them, I suppose. The rest of the team is actually very strong, and the question, of course, is going to be whether we actually spend the one free transfer that I actually have to go for Julian Alvarez, or to go from Julian Alvarez to Haaland. Personally, I think that it is a move where we have to sort of make a decision for ourselves in terms of whether we think Julian Alvarez will start the next game versus Haaland. I think that, of course, Haaland might have looked like he needs a little bit more time on the field, but the reality is he is fit, and this is still a good chance for him to play. Now, what is interesting, I suppose, is that technically we could still see Julian Alvarez play again with Haaland, right? Someone or some of the midfield roles that are sort of shared with players like Mateus Nunes, that those roles could be filled by an Alvarez and even technically a Foden. What we have seen, of course, is that Foden has gone out wide. We also saw Bernardo Silva get rest, and that does have impacts on, thinking about Foden and Alvarez in the future. What we should do with them. Personally, I think because the Brentford fixture isn't an electrically good fixture, maybe it actually does make sense to potentially roll our free transfer, or even think about other plans for this week, and then actually sort of save the money in the bank to decide whether we have, first of all, a Liverpool double game week, or two, and can get Salah, of course, because Salah is sort of training again. He's actually just running on grass, which doesn't mean that he's in full training. So if you remember, Haaland was running on grass for a long time, but also, out from full competitive football for a long time too. So we need to sort of see exactly how the Salah injury situation develops, how the Liverpool double game week develops, and then also we can then make that sort of educated decision as to whether we go for Alvarez to Haaland. I think compared to the rest of the field, when I show my transfer page, I have 8.7 million in the bank. So when I actually go from Julian Alvarez to Haaland, the big difference that I have with some other players right now is that I've got 1.6 million in the bank. And part of this, of course, is because I own Trent and I don't own someone like KDB as well, or Salah. So the issue that I have, I suppose, is that I have a small advantage from some other managers who feel forced to go to Haaland because, of course, with the Haaland price rise and maybe another price rise coming if he's supposed to go to 14.1 million over this game week, and of course, Alvarez has already price drop. One of the issues, I suppose, is that some managers will have to make the move because they think they'll be forced to do so. I'm not necessarily in this predicament, so I think I can just wait to make my transfer at the end of the deadline. One of the concerns for me, of course, is that Colwill is injured when he actually has a really good fixture versus Wolves at home. We know this Chelsea team have been perfectly good at sort of dispatching weaker teams. Wolves, of course, are sort of right next to Chelsea on the league table, so maybe I don't think it's fair to say that. But of course, we know from underlying stats that Chelsea is still a pretty competent defense at home and also versus weaker teams. So from that sort of point of view, I think that I do want to be waiting for Colwill information as well. So that's the best thing that my team can do. With the Connor Bradley situation, though, with Trent, I think Connor Bradley has been playing amazing. And even though a lot of people like to say that, either Trent can sort of play in a midfield position or he can play right back, I do think it's quite a significant concern because if we even look at Trent as someone who, we want to own for the double game week in 25, if Connor Bradley is playing this well, I mean, I don't think it's an overreaction to say that maybe Trent is a bad own for me. And the question, I suppose, is whether I have enough funds in the future and enough transfers in the future to sort of take Trent away from my team and maybe go into someone else that I think could benefit me within this Liverpool squad. I think it's very tough to do so. I think I'll reluctantly have to keep Trent, and I'm going to have to hope for the best in terms of him maximizing his minutes over the next few weeks, particularly also versus Burnley. But that's my situation. And with Darwin, of course, him being the penalty taker sort of makes him a better FPL asset in the short term that Salah's out. Now, of course, the penalty taker situation can change, but I think that Jurgen Klopp is also someone who has sort of respected the fact that people will miss penalties and that they're allowed to stay on them. So I think Darwin should hopefully stay on penalties over this run before Salah comes back. And that's a nice positive, ultimately. As far as the rest of the team, though, as I said, Richarlison seems to be getting an insane abundance of minutes within Spurs, and I think he's fully fit. And personally, I think even when Son comes back into the team, it's very unlikely that I'll be taking Richarlison immediately out of my team. So I actually really like Richarlison right now, and I don't have any sort of immediate plans to move him out. When I look at the midfield, of course, I'm thinking about Anthony Gordon, who will probably deputize in the center forward position for this Newcastle team whilst Isaac is out. So that's actually a huge benefit, right? He's the one midfielder that I'd say I probably won't be making a transfer towards that I actually think I'm quite jealous that other managers own. As far as other defensive picks, Estupiñán with poor minutes in Brighton, of course, showing a pretty poor defensive display versus Luton is an interesting one because I was actually very interested in getting Estupiñán. And of course, I have an issue now with Colwill, who won't even give me, this good game week for this week. So that's the issue I have. And potentially, I could also rectify my team by having a defender transfer instead, as opposed to going towards Haaland. So that's sort of my plan so far, just because it's very likely that Julian Alvarez could play again and even Foden. So I think that's interesting context for FPL, and it just calls into question whether I continue to sort of hoard all this money in the bank, but whether I spend it really just depends on whether we get news before the deadline that Haaland will start, and I think it's so unlikely that we'll do so. I know a lot of managers think that now suddenly I've got access to Man City team sheets. This is not the case, but if you refuse to believe me, that's totally fine. As I said, I won't be talking more about the matter. I also no longer plan to not be around the deadline just because, unfortunately, this week was one that was where I was very busy at work. And so I should be able to react to all deadline news as usual, and we will be there at the live stream. And that's that for me for this week. So in terms of sort of thinking about FPL in the future, of course, we have a future double game week in terms of, let's say, game week 25 for Man City. But the bigger context, I suppose, is that we still haven't gotten the news that Liverpool have a double game week. So when I think about players like Darwin and Trent, Darwin's minutes are really good so far. Trent's minutes are a bit concerning. If Liverpool don't get a double game week, it makes it very easy to transfer out Trent. And given that, of course, he's a blanker on game week 26, or very likely a blanker on game week 26, I probably have to sort of transfer out Trent. Alternatively, of course, I have to sort of transfer out Pedro Porro, right? Let's say if Liverpool actually get a double game week, it might be the case that I actually go for someone like Porro. I'm hoping that I can actually survive on game week 26 with a pretty weak defense. But because Colwill is injured, that situation also has to be managed, right? Because he's a blanker and he probably deserves to be taken out of my team first over someone like Porro, who still looks consistently good, or even Trent, who, when he plays is good. And so that's sort of the context of my team and my transfer plans. As I said, the alternative transfer plans is simply to go for maybe an Aston Villa defender, because I think the fixture is still very, very good for double game week 23, and I have some defensive issues within my team. So thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you guys understand my thoughts, and I hope I've made myself clear. Hope you guys take care. Enjoy the rest of the game week, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.